David Fincher kicked off a whole new chapter of his career with Se7en. It became his chance to win back the trust of Hollywood after the rough experience with Alien 3. But even more importantly, this movie marks the beginning of that now famous Fincher style. Cold visuals, a world drained of hope, and characters drowning in their own inner demons. On paper, Se7en sounds like a regular buddy cop thriller about two detectives chasing down a serial killer, but the movie deliberately steps away from all the usual cliches. There are almost no car chases, no big shootouts, and the killer doesn't even show his face until the last stretch of the story. Fincher isn't chasing action. He leans into suspense and what's left unsaid. The most brutal crimes happen off-screen, and the fear comes not from what we see, but from what our imagination fills in. In this breakdown, we're going to look at how the relationship and tension between the two detectives unfolds, why the villain feels so powerful despite barely being on screen, and which visual and narrative tricks turn Se7en from a simple thriller into a bleak story about human corruption and sign.
Look, Tracy, I don't think I'm the one to talk to about this.
I hate this city.
The story Fincher tells feels incredibly familiar at first glance. Two detectives hunting down a serial killer, piecing clues together, step by step closing in on the moment where justice finally wins. And of course, the partners are total opposites. One's a worn-out veteran, the other's a young, fiery rookie.
I'm too old for this shit.
Se7en starts exactly like that, almost as if we've already watched this movie 100 times. The first half hour plays like a strange mashup of classic noir and a buddy cop drama. Detective William Somerset is basically counting down the days until retirement, and he's forced to take on a new partner, David Mills, who's impulsive, straightforward, and maybe a little too confident for his own good.
I want you to look and I want you to listen, okay?
Now, I wasn't standing around guarding the Taco Bell. I've worked homicide 5 years.
Not here.
At first, their dynamic goes exactly the way you'd expect. Mills pushes back against the rules. Somerset sighs and lectures him, and it feels like another young hothead versus old wise mentor setup. But slowly, the tension melts. Mills starts to trust Somerset, and pretty soon he sees him not just as a co-worker, but almost like a father figure, someone who keeps him grounded and stops him from doing something stupid. But the real meat of the story lies deeper than that simple clash of personalities. Fincher builds the movie around a much bigger conflict, a worldview split right down the middle. Mills brings restless optimism and a belief that the world can change. Somerset embodies a calm, worn-down cynicism that's been shaped by years of disappointment. And that philosophical clash becomes the heart of the film, way more important than the hunt for the killer. Se7en came out in the mid-90s, a turning point where the world was basically learning how to exist all over again. The Cold War was finally over. The internet was starting to sneak into every home. Society was cracking in a dozen places at once, and people were scrambling to make sense of a new reality. Fincher drops two characters right into that moment, and they couldn't look at the future more differently. Their conversations aren't just typical partner arguments. They're a clash of eras, values, and ways of seeing the world.
Wait, how is this legal? Only illegal, these terms don't apply.
So it's no surprise the film leans heavily into noir traditions, a genre that always reacts sharply to its time, and Mills and Somerset clearly represent two different versions of noir. Somerset is the old-school classic, while Mills stands for the modern, louder, neo-noir sensibility. Even the way they dress drives that point home. Somerset looks like he stepped straight out of a black-and-white detective movie. A neat suit, a hat, a trench coat, everything clean and proper. Mills, on the other hand, is a child of the late century. Relaxed clothes, a bright tie that doesn't match the jacket, and a leather coat that practically screams, "I'm not playing by your rules." Somerset feels like a character we've known for decades. Quiet, educated, thoughtful, with a past he'd rather not revisit, a family life that never worked out, loneliness he's just learned to live with, a sharp mind that won't let him sleep at night. He isn't bitter, but he's long lost faith in big ideals and happy endings.
I just don't think I can continue to live in a place that embraces and nurtures apathy as if it was a virtue.
Mills is everything he's not. He's fiery, impatient, and absolutely convinced the world can still be fixed. He has a wife, a home, and a picture-perfect future he believes he's building, like the glossy promise of the booming late 20th century. Somerset sees the world falling apart because he's been watching the seams split for years. Mills thinks those same cracks can be repaired, as long as he pushes hard enough. The way the two detectives approach the case says everything about how differently they see the world. Somerset treats the investigation like a chess match. He studies the killer's mindset, breaks down motives piece by piece, and tries to win with logic. Mills works the opposite way. He pushes forward with force, speed, and pure adrenaline, and throws a punch if that's what it takes. Their partnership ends up feeling a lot like the duo from the Divine Comedy. Somerset as the wise, steady guide Virgil, and Mills as the fiery, emotional Dante. The reference fits. The whole movie plays out like a slow descent into hell, and the only way they can make it through is by learning to work together instead of pulling in opposite directions. That's where Tracy, Mills's wife, comes in. She's almost the only woman in the story, and she's far more important than a background character. She's the one who gently pulls the two men closer, inviting Somerset over, opening her home, and giving them a place where they can connect as people, not just co-workers chasing a psychopath. In that sense, Tracy becomes the hidden anchor of the movie. Through her, Fincher creates emotional balance between the detectives and builds a bridge between two completely different worldviews. Tracy's importance becomes crystal clear in the finale. Gwyneth Paltrow's character is basically the only source of light in a world where hope feels almost impossible. Her pregnancy drives the point home. She literally carries the promise of a better future, a chance for something new. So when she dies, it's not just another move in the killer's plan. It hits Mills like a wrecking ball and shatters everything he believes in. His dream of a good life, his faith in love, his confidence that the world can be fixed if you try hard enough. And with that, the movie's biggest philosophical conflict falls into place. Mills's optimism collapses, and Somerset's cold, worn-down realism ends up being the only worldview that holds.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
But Fincher doesn't leave us in total darkness. The final scene quietly completes Somerset's story arc. At the start, he can't wait to retire and leave the city's ugliness behind. By the end, it's obvious he isn't going anywhere. Under the trench coat and fedora is someone who still matters, not because he believes good will triumph, but because walking away would mean letting evil win by default.
Where you gonna be?
Around.
So, the movie doesn't end with comfort or triumph. It ends with something quieter and more human, a stubborn choice to keep fighting, even when hope has been ripped away. Se7en practically breathes the feeling that the world is ending, even though nobody in the movie ever says it out loud. In the mid-90s, there was this constant tension in the air. A new century coming, a new millennium, and no one had any idea whether the future meant progress or total collapse. Fincher taps right into that energy, turning the city and its people into symbols of a world slowly burning out. The number 7 becomes the movie's backbone. The story unfolds over 7 days. The detectives investigate 7 murders, and each one represents one of the 7 deadly sins. The whole film feels like a twisted mirror of religious structure, from 7 days of creation to biblical punishments raining down on humanity. Within that setup, the killer becomes almost mythic. You can see pieces of 2 different biblical figures in him: a merciless creator building his own warped version of order, and a snake tempter who simply nudges people toward the sins they already carry inside. The world of Se7en is brutally Old Testament. There's no forgiveness, no redemption, no chance to start over, only judgment and consequences. Goodness is fragile, and sin seems to be everywhere. But Fincher doesn't turn the villain into a literal devil or a comic book monster. What makes him terrifying is how ordinary he is. He's not a foaming maniac or a theatrical killer. He's a guy who could easily pass you on the street, stand behind you in line at a coffee shop, or walk up the stairs without anyone noticing.
Close crime scene. Get the fuck out of here.
I got a right to be here.
And that banality, that normalcy, is far scarier than any blood or gore we never see. The killer's name says everything: John Doe. That's the label cops stick on bodies when they can't identify them. Fincher uses it to underline the point. This villain isn't special. He's not a chosen one or a myth. He's someone who could be anybody. Pop culture is obsessed with explaining serial killers, digging up their childhoods, finding the trauma, diagnosing the pathology. Se7en deliberately goes the other way. The filmmakers strip the killer of a backstory. We learn nothing about his life, his personality, or his mind, and that emptiness ends up being scarier than any tragic origin story. Our only real glimpse into his world comes in the opening credits. Those frantic, scratchy shots show not the man, but the work, a twisted blend of ritual, obsession, and chilling precision. It's not there to make us pity him. It forces us to ask a harder question. What kind of society produces someone like this? The movie makes one thing very clear: serial killers don't just pop out of nowhere, and slapping psychological terms on them is way too simplistic.
It's more comfortable for you to label me insane.
It's very comfortable.
It's not something I would expect you to accept, but I did not choose. I was chosen.
Doe isn't the disease, he's the symptom, a product of a world where people barely connect, where morality blurs, and where everyone is too numb or too busy to face what's rotting around them. And he doesn't see himself as a monster at all. In his mind, he's a tool, a blade of divine punishment, here to scrub sin out of a corrupt city. And that's where he finally says what no one else in the film dares to admit: isolation, loneliness, and human disconnection aren't side effects. They're the real plague swallowing the world. Ironically, it's the villain who delivers the most honest verdict on his era.
Wanting people to listen, you can't just tap them on the shoulder anymore. You have to hit them with a sledgehammer.
If you look closely, John Doe is way closer to Somerset than anyone wants to admit. They both see the world falling apart. They both think society is sick. The only difference is how they deal with it. Somerset settles into quiet despair and dreams of escaping, while Doe chooses a brutal, twisted cure. That emptiness, no name, no past, no real identity, turns Doe into something almost ghost-like. He stops feeling like a real person and becomes more like a cold force of destruction, a bad wind moving through the city. It's no wonder the cops can't catch him. Doe shows up and disappears like he walks through walls, and in the end, he's only arrested because he decides it's time. That's why Doe feels less like a lone psycho and more like a natural disaster. The city is drowning in endless rain. The air feels soaked and heavy, and it's like the storm doesn't follow him. He brings it. And the killings themselves aren't random madness. They're carefully designed performances. Each crime scene looks like a stage set, like a twisted art installation built to deliver a message where the concept matters more than the victim. Doe acts less like a predator and more like a bleak artist, someone using sin as raw material and death as his medium.
Is that to say, John, that what you were doing was God's good work?
The Lord works in mysterious ways.
Fincher will circle back to this kind of killer again in Zodiac, where the murderer turns newspapers and TV into his personal microphone, and again in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, where the media landscape is shown to be fully capable of creating its own monsters, as long as you give them a spotlight.
I think people are perverts. I've maintained that. That's the foundation of my career.
There's a small detail that's easy to miss, but it perfectly sums up what the movie is doing. The end credits in Se7en roll down, not up, like normal. It's a visual whisper, a metaphor. Everything we just watched takes place in a world flipped upside down, a reality where the rules are broken from the start. Fincher's goal is to put the audience somewhere uncomfortable, not watching from a safe distance, but stuck inside a place that feels like a trap. That's why the film looks the way it does. Hardly any natural light, an endless spectrum of blacks and grays and dirty, rusted colors that make it feel like the city itself is decaying from the inside out. Even the only sunny scene, the ending, doesn't feel warm. The yellow light isn't comforting. It feels sick, like a burnt-out bulb on its last flicker. There's sunlight on the screen, but no hope in sight. And yet, Seven isn't just a completely dark-looking movie. Fincher secretly codes each sin with its own color palette. Lust explodes in toxic reds, like a warning signal right before disaster. Sloth sinks into swampy, suffocating greens. Pride feels trapped in icy, sterile whites, like a hospital with no soul. These choices don't just make the movie visually striking, they help the audience navigate through it. Every scene feels like a part of the same hell, but each room has its own identity. The film also sits right on the border between two genres. From noir, it carries the shadows, the investigation, and the sense of doom. From horror, it borrows texture, peeling walls, rain-slick streets, mold and grime, the physical feeling of rot. And most importantly, Fincher keeps the worst horrors off-screen. He lets the audience imagine the violence, and our imaginations always come up with something worse. The best example is the famous box in the final scene. We never see what's inside, but that doesn't matter. The shock is so intense that countless people who watched the movie in theaters swore they actually saw Gwyneth Paltrow's head, even though that shot doesn't exist at all.
She begged for her life. Shut up. And for the life of the baby inside of her. Oh, he didn't know.
In Seven, the real horror isn't what's shown. It's what leaks in from the edges, in the space the camera refuses to reveal. One of the key elements of Seven is the setting. The movie takes place in an unnamed metropolis that feels like New York, Chicago, and a dozen other cities all mashed together. Fincher strips it of anything distinctive. It's a composite space, a hint that this nightmare could unfold in any major city. Here, the city isn't just a backdrop, it's a mood. It presses in from all sides, trapping everyone in concrete, and it never lets the audience feel safe. The only moments that feel remotely warm are the scenes where the characters connect with each other. They're lit softly, with a warm glow, and even then, you can sense something lurking just outside the frame.
There are things to any city.
Fincher constantly reminds us that someone unseen is watching. Wide shots are framed as if the camera is John Doe's eyes, cold, distant, and calculating, following the detectives without being noticed. That's why the city feels less like a location and more like a maze someone has already rigged with traps. There's a great contrast between two scenes, the sudden chase with the killer, shot with shaky handheld footage, and the finale, where everything unfolds exactly how Doe planned, and the camera becomes still and controlled again. That shift quietly signals who's in charge. Early on, fate seems to be guiding the story, but by the end, the villain is calling all the shots. Fincher also hides meaning in smaller visual cues. Take the power lines forming a grid in the last act. The detectives think they're closing in, then realize the cage has snapped shut around them. To dial up the discomfort, Fincher almost never films from a normal, eye-level angle. The camera often looks down on the characters or up at them, making the viewer feel unsteady, like the ground is tilting. Because of that, Somerset and Mills are constantly cut off by the frame. Half bodies, missing faces, shoulders without context, and the close-ups on random details make the world feel even more fragmented. We see pieces of the picture, but never the whole thing. That fractured visual style mirrors the investigation itself. We always feel like the truth is close, just around the corner, but we can't quite grab it. And what's left behind is uncertainty and dread.
Who said this was murder?
No one.
Seven was a true game changer. Its impact is still obvious today. Almost 30 years later, the movie feels just as sharp, and its tone echoes through modern thrillers. Fincher didn't just make a successful film, he rewired what the crime genre looks like, turning grim, moody noir into the new visual standard. After Seven, a whole wave of stories followed in its footsteps. Detective shows like the first season of True Detective, dark takes on superhero worlds, and even horror films where crime and fear blend into the same thing. But the film's biggest legacy isn't just the copycats, it's the reputation it gave Fincher. Seven is where he truly became known as a visionary filmmaker. This is the movie that locked in his iconic style, cold, precise, almost mathematical. You see the same fingerprints later in Zodiac, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and eventually Mindhunter. Fincher often gets criticized for being too bleak, too grim, too clinical, but the irony is that Seven actually gives us a tiny bit of hope. The movie seems to whisper, yes, the world is brutal. Yes, evil wins sometimes. But giving up is the only way to guarantee it wins forever. And in that whisper, in that tiny spark, lives the film's quiet optimism.